Hello everybody, my name is Iman and I'm your virtual tutor today as we go through the first civilizations, also known as Mesopotamia and the Indus River Valley. Let's start with the objectives. In this lesson, students will gain an important understanding of two of the world's first civilizations and how they first lived. They will develop a brief historical context and their advancements, achievements, and what happened to them. The target grade is 3rd to 6th grade and the lesson can be modified as needed. Let's start with Mesopotamia. Fun fact, the word Mesopotamia is formed from the ancient word meso, meaning between, and potamos, meaning river. So Mesopotamia is literally between the river. Let's start with geography. Where are they located today? Mesopotamia is located in a region known as the Middle East, which includes Southwest Asia and lands around the eastern Mediterranean Sea. Situated in the fertile area between the Tigris and the Euphrates River, the region is now home to modern-day Iraq, Kuwait, Turkey, and Syria. So you can look at the location on a map and how the area looked back then and in modern day. As you can see, the land is the same, however, the countries and their names are quite different. So the Tigris and Euphrates rivers were very important to the Mesopotamians. Having fertile land and a constant water supply is essential for any civilization, and this was the reason for the Mesopotamian success. Over time, they built dams and pools to store water. They were able to create complex irrigation system and were forced to work together to clean and maintain the canals. Through working together, villages became towns, which grew into cities. So this allowed their civilization to develop into a complex society. And of course, they had a supply of fresh water, and because they were able to irrigate crops, they had a constant food supply for their growing population. Sumer is considered to be the first empire, as that is what historians know the most about. So we'll start with Sumer, however, we will go into a few of the other empires later on. So how did they form? Nomads moved into the fertile land and began to form small villages which slowly grew into large towns. Eventually, again, these cities developed into the civilization of Sumer. Each city of Sumer functioned as an independent city-state, with each of them often fighting each other. Some of the most powerful city-states are down below. I cannot pronounce them. However, as you can see, they peaked around 2800 BC, so this was definitely very far back in the view of modern day. So one of the greatest achievements of the Sumerians is cuneiform, which they advanced around 3200 BC. It is essentially a system in which they have a clay tablet and they're able to create like wedge-shaped marks using a blunt reed as a pen or a stylus. This writing style was used throughout Mesopotamian history and is a big part of their culture and what we know about them. Something very important to note is that this is not a set alphabet, but rather a way in writing. Just as today we use paper and pen often to write, and then people like in the 1800s, they would use ink and quills and paper. In ancient times, they would have cuneiform with clay tablets. So there mostly are two major systems, Sumerian and Akkadian. They both use the same system with cuneiform, however, they had a different alphabet, which is known as Sumerian cuneiform and Akkadian cuneiform, which we will learn about the Akkad. So again, how was it translated? How do we know all of this information about the Mesopotamians? It was translated in 1823 using the Rosetta Stone by Jean Champollion because of how he previously deciphered Egyptian hieroglyphics and used that to his advantage. However, it is important to note that since cuneiform was first deciphered by scholars around 150 years ago, the script has only uncovered its secrets to a small group of people who could read it. So majority of the cuneiform texts remain untranslated. So mostly what we know about the Mesopotamians is very small in comparison to how grand the empire and the people were. So here are a few photos. You can see this is the Rosetta Stone, and then on the right is the Sumerian cuneiform, and the bottom is Babylonian cuneiform, which is another empire that we will get to. Okay, so this is a fun little exercise that I want you guys to try, which is writing your name in cuneiform. Of course, cuneiform is very different to modern languages and alphabets. However, it is interesting to compare and see what you would have done in the olden days. So this is the Babylonian cuneiform alphabet. As you can see, it's just a bunch of triangles or wedges with lines. And then on the right, my name is Iman. So this is how my name would look like, very different, which is very different from how I normally write my name. So let's go through some other achievements of the Sumerians. The wheel, the Sumerians invented the wheel so that it would be easier to carry trading goods around. It was invented in 3500 BCE, which is a very long time ago, and a lot of other civilizations were able to take the Sumerian invention and use it for their own benefit around that area. They also had the chariot, which was used to carry people and supplies. They're also accredited for the use of geometry, and they use that for many important things, such as building temples, roads, and houses, and as well as lunar calendars are very important to many ancient civilizations. However, the Sumerians are known to be the first ones to use the lunar calendar. And it was important for the flooding season to make sure that they planned ahead and their food didn't get spoiled. So let's do a little quick check. Number 1, which of the following is the correct name of the 2 rivers found in Mesopotamia? And which of the following is not a Sumerian specific achievement? I'll give you a sec. So the answer is number 1 is D and number 2 is C. So the Tigris and the Euphrates are the correct names of the 2 rivers, and having large and complex cities is not a Sumerian specific achievement. You will see in a lot of as you go on to study further, a lot of ancient civilizations built large and complex cities because they were able to adapt to their environment, which is an important concept. Okay, so this is part 3 is Mesopotamian life and culture in a general concept. So this is just how Mesopotamian life is like. Okay. So they had social classes. This was just kind of like a direct cause of how large cities were being created. So inevitably, social classes with people at the bottom and the people at the top grew out of that. So the top of the society was the king and his family, but the priests are also very close to the top, and you will see in a little bit that they were a religious-based society. And there was also the upper class that was made up of high-level administrators and scribes. Below the upper class was a small middle class, of course. The lower class is right below them, which is mostly made up of laborers and farmers, excuse me. There was a little bit of social mobility here with laborers, like special laborers and farmers who could kind of go up. However, social mobility was not very common. And of course, every society had slaves, and these slaves were at the bottom. They were typically owned by the king and sold among the upper class, and they were usually captured in battle and kind of a sign of victory as the king enslaved another king's people. So as for housing, most people lived in mud brick homes. They were rectangular in shape and had 2 to 3 levels. The mud bricks worked as a good insulator and kept the home at a constant temperature, even in the fall, in the winter, spring, all of that. So religion. Mesopotamians were polytheistic. They worshipped several major gods and thousands of minor gods. This is definitely a similarity to ancient Egypt, which I'm sure all of you know about how they had thousands of gods. They were a religion-based society. Each city-state had its own god, kind of a patron god or goddess. At the center of the city was a large temple, also known as a ziggurat, built to that specific god. At the top of the ziggurat was a shrine to that god. The priests, again, they would perform sacrifice and other rituals here. Typically, the priests would pray for the well-being of the king and to make sure that the city-state would do well. So for that reason, the priests were very important to the society. They were very close to the top. They're right below the king. Because if the gods were angry, they believed that the city-state will fail. And for that reason, again, the priests were high up on the social pyramid. Each empire, Akkadian, Babylonian, or Assyrian, had their own gods and goddesses, but many originated or were inspired by Sumer. So, for example, Babylonian versus Sumerian gods and goddesses were slightly different. However, you could definitely see the similarity. They just had different names. So here are a few images of artifacts that have been found. And then at the bottom, you can see this is a ziggurat, as it was typically made with mud and sand, and it was typically the biggest building in the city-state. Artisans played an important role in the culture of the Mesopotamian people. This is how they are remembered. A lot of the artifacts archaeologists have uncovered have led us to understand the Mesopotamians better, and these were all art pieces. They typically made everyday useful items as well as great works of art meant to glorify the gods and the king. So potters, the most common material for Mesopotamian artists was clay. There was jewelry, as fine jewelry was considered to be a status symbol among ancient Mesopotamia. There was metalsmiths, and they typically use bronze, tin, and copper to make all sorts of tools, weapons, and sculptures. And finally, there were stonemasons that carved everything from large sculptures to small, little detailed pieces. And these sculptures were typically religious or glorifying the king. One of the most important pieces that we have of ancient Mesopotamia is the Epic of Gilgamesh. It is considered to be the oldest known work of literature. The story was first recorded by a Babylonian scribe and scribes are people who would write cuneiform. Of course, not everybody was able to do this process because it isn't that simple. So the scribes were the only ones who had the ability to cuneiform. So of course they were very important to society. I forgot to mention that, but yeah, sorry for getting off track. But the tale itself tells of the Sumerian people and myths. Likely the story was created much earlier and the scribe was just telling his version of it. So the Epic of Gilgamesh originally began as an oral tradition, then it moves on to a written piece of literature. What is it about? It is about the king Gilgamesh of Uruk. Gilgamesh is part god, part human. He could defeat any enemy in battle and could even lift mountains. So this is kind of similar to Greek mythology. He and his half-friend Enkidu go through dangerous quests and adventures, and then Gilgamesh searches for the secret to immortality. Although it is a very nice story, its significance is that it tells a lot about the Mesopotamian life and culture. So this is on the left of an artifact of the original copy of the Epic of Gilgamesh, and on the right is a sculpture on how Gilgamesh would have looked like. Okay, so the Code of Ur-Nammu. The Code of Ur-Nammu is the oldest known surviving law code. It is a Sumerian law collection that dates back to the end of the 3rd millennium and is named for the rulers of Ur-Nammu, to whom the laws were created by. Many of the laws were based on harsh punishment based around murder and payments of silver. Then we also have the Code of Hammurabi, which this one is a lot more famous than the Code of Ur-Nammu. However, they're equally important, but just for different reasons. First great king of Babylon was King Hammurabi. He conquered all of Mesopotamia and he established the Babylonian Empire. He's famous for having the diorite stele in the middle of his empire, or of Babylon, and the diorite stele is a large stone, and it contains around 4,000 lines of text and almost 300 different laws. And at the top of the fingertip, you could say, is a card picture of King Hammurabi being given the laws by a Babylonian sun god. So this was in front and center of the entire empire, and everybody could see the laws, and it was a constant reminder to them what they should be doing and how they should be treating others. Again, it gave insight on Babylonian life and culture and explains important ideas such as having people provide evidence of a crime and being innocent until being proven guilty, which are all concepts and important ideas that are still being used today. So the Code of Hammurabi is famous for being the first example of fairness and equality. So what is the difference between the two of them? Although both are very similar and serve a historical importance, there are a few differences in the type of laws. So I'll read to you guys the different examples of laws, and you can kind of see the difference. So the Code of Yarnamu, if a man commits a murder, that man must be killed. If a man commits a robbery, he will be killed. Then Hammurabi, if a man puts out the eye of another man, his eye shall be put out. If a man strikes a freeborn woman so that she loses her unborn child, he shall pay 10 shekels for her loss. Although Yarnamu was the first legal code, Hammurabi was the first to establish rights and the individual and fair punishments. And this was a major achievement, of course, because Hammurabi did influence a lot of other people. So here's a little example of the U.S. Amendment versus the Code of Hammurabi. One similarity is that the majority of the population have to follow the laws. These were the greatest laws of the land. The Code of Hammurabi, although it is not as strict as the Code of Yarnamu, it is way more strict than the U.S. amendments. The 27 amendments of the U.S. Constitution have to go through a lot of people and a lot of states before they are approved and can be implemented into the government. However, the Code of Hammurabi was just created by one man, Hammurabi, and there was no output. There was no input from anybody else. So that's another difference. So you can see the difference between the Code of Hammurabi and Code of Yarnamu. Like for example, on the left, if a man now cut the eye of another man, he shall weigh out a half a mina of silver. If a man puts out the eye of another man, his eye shall be put out. So as you can see, there's a lot more fairness and discipline with Hammurabi. So let's try an exercise. What topic is this Hammurabi law discussing? This is all in very old English. However, if you can find the key ideas that are being discussed, it shouldn't be difficult. Let's read it. Number one, if anyone is committing a robbery and is caught, then he shall be put to death. 2, if a woman quarrel with her husband and say, "You are not congenial to me," the reasons for her prejudice must be presented. If she is guiltless and there is no fault on her part, but he leaves and neglects her, then no guilt attaches to this woman. She shall take her dowry and go back to her father's house. Number 3, if anyone takes a male or female slave of the court or a male or female slave of a freedman outside of the city gate, he shall be put to death. Number 4, if a herdsman to whose care cattle or sheep have been entrusted be guilty of fraud and make false returns of the natural increase or sell them for money, then shall he be convicted and pay the owner 10 times the loss. So think about the words that are familiar and connect them to important ideas today. All right, so number 1 is theft, number 2 is divorce, number 3 is slavery, and number 4 is fraud. Anything similar can also work as well, but the important idea here is that the Code of Hammurabi did establish rights that are very important to this day. Okay, so part 4 is brief history. This is a very brief example. I will have links to more information if you are interested. So it is important to note that Mesopotamia was not always united, and that the Akkadians lived in northern Mesopotamia while the Sumerians lived in the south. They had a similar government culture, however, they had different languages. The Akkadian rulers began to see the advantage of uniting many of their cities under a single nation because they had more power as one, so decided to work together. Around 2300 BC, Sargon the Great, that is an important figure, he rose to power and was the ruler of Akkad. When the Sumerian city of Uruk attacked the city, he conquered Uruk. He then went to conquer all of the Sumerian city-states, and he was able to finally establish one Mesopotamia under a single ruler, which this was very different for them as for 1,000 years, Sumer and all of Mesopotamia was used to having separate city-states. And now they're going to go back. You'll see, however, they will go back and forth with being conquered by certain people and certain rulers who just want power. So Babylon. After the fall of the Akkadian Empire, the area was once again divided. However, this time there were two new empires that rose to power. There was no more Sumer, however, there was the Babylonians in the south and the Assyrians to the north. This kind of sounds like Assyria, however, they were the Assyrians, so make sure you remember that there is a difference. Syria is a modern-day country, while the Assyrians is an ethnic group, you could say, that originated long time ago. The Babylonians were the first to form an empire that would include all of Mesopotamia. Babylon was originally just a city-state. However, the city-state began to rise in power when King Hammurabi took the throne. He was able to conquer all of Mesopotamia, including the Assyrian land. Hammurabi was a great and fair ruler, so it was natural that Babylon became the most powerful city in the world. It was a cultural center where many ideas could be exchanged. This is when he was able to establish the Code of Hammurabi. Sadly, his sons were too weak, and the empire fell. Afterwards, the Assyrians took over. The Assyrians and the Babylonians, for 1,000 years or so, they went back and forth with each other. For a certain amount of time, the Assyrians had power, then they fell, and then a couple centuries after, the Babylonians came to power. There's no need to know all of that. However, it is important to remember that for much of Mesopotamian history, there was constant shifts between Assyrians and Babylonians. The most notable Assyrian empire was the Neo-Assyrian Empire, which was the Third Rise, which it lasted around 100 years from 744 BC to 612 BC. Remember that BC is counting down to 0, so 744 BC is technically older than 612 BC. Just something to mention. During this time, Assyria had powerful and capable rulers that built the empire into one of the most powerful empires in the world. They were able to conquer much of the Middle East and Egypt. However, it was the Babylonians who conquered the Assyrians. The reason for their greatness was because they were a warrior society where fighting was a part of their life. They were known to be ruthless warriors. An important figure of the Neo-Babylonian Empire is Nebuchadnezzar II. His father, I believe his name is King Nabopolassar, took advantage of the fall of the Assyrian Empire, as we just saw, and his son took the throne, and he was able to bring the Babylonians to their peak that they hadn't experienced since Hammurabi around 1,000 years ago. Nebuchadnezzar, he was a great military leader, and he expanded the empire to include much of the Middle East. He's famous for the conquering of the Hebrews and taking them to slavery for 70 years, as told in the Bible. He's also famous for building the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, which are large terraces. The garden is considered one of the greatest wonders of the ancient world. Again, he brought Babylon into a great cultural center and one of the greatest cities in the world at the time. So on the left, you can see the Hanging Gardens, and interestingly enough, although they are considered an ancient wonder and achievement, historians are not certain if they even ever existed, because there is no evidence. There is no there's no remains, and some documents that have been found point to the Hanging Gardens, while others just reference them. Well, there are a few documents in the time period that don't even mention the Hanging Gardens, despite how important they may seem. So that is interesting. So who knows? Maybe they never even existed. On the right is the Library of Nineveh, which was created by the last Assyrian king. He was able to collect tablets from all over Mesopotamia, and because of this library, we know so much about Mesopotamia. So how did they eventually fall? In 529 BC, the Persians conquered Babylon and made it part of the Persian Empire. Persia was based on monotheism, and they had a completely different language and culture. So the Mesopotamian culture and people were slowly being lost. By the time Alexander the Great from the Greek Empire conquered the Persian Empire in 331 BC, most of the great cities in Mesopotamia were no longer existent, and the culture had been taken over. By this point, the people and the language and the culture had shifted from being this ancient culture to a more traditional Middle Eastern culture that we know of it today. So here's a song. This is a lot of information. So here's a link to a song that you can check out that can nicely summarize everything that has been mentioned today. Okay, let's do true or false. Number 1, the Sumerians were conquered by Hammurabi. Number 2, the Assyrians are to the north and the Babylonians are to the south. Number 3, the Hanging Gardens still exist in the Middle East. Number 4, Nebuchadnezzar II was able to bring the Babylonians to their former glory. Number 5, the Akkadians were led by Sargon the Great. Number 6, the Akkadians had a similar culture and lifestyle to the Sumerians. Number 7, the Mesopotamians fell when the Greeks conquered them. So I'll give you a second. All right, so here are the answers. Just check your work. All right, so we'll go on to the Indus River Valley. So where is it located? It extends from modern-day northeast Afghanistan to Pakistan and northwest India. Sometimes it is also referred to as the Harappan civilization because of the great city Harappa, which many people first think of when you mention the Indus River Valley. So why is the Indus River important? That is a major part of the society, and for a great reason. The first farmers liked living near the river because it kept the land green and fertile for growing crops. They lived together in villages, which again grew into ancient cities. They were able to use the water for a lot of different things. As a result of the river's highly nutritious water, they were able to produce great surpluses of food for their civilization. The river attracted a lot of animals for them to hunt. This is very similar to the Tigris and the Euphrates River. These major civilizations were able to run and function so well because of how close they were to a river. So this is a location in modern day South Asia, and this is down below is the Indus River today, and as you can see, it runs through Pakistan. Okay, so the origins of the people. Some of the oldest remains in South Asia date back to around 75,000 years ago. These ancient humans made tools and lived a nomadic hunter-gatherer life. Slowly but surely, they were able to develop and live in permanent places, and the villages began, and those turned into cities and the civilization that we know today. So of course they had to adapt to their land. The buildings were made from mud bricks that had to be fired in a kiln to make it harder. Again, this is another similarity to the Mesopotamians. Homes were built along the road, sometimes with multiple stories. From what archaeologists have gathered, most urban homes had water treatment systems in their home, which is a technology that wouldn't be matched in history for over 3,000 years. They had a high quality urban planning, which suggests that there was a high priority on hygiene, And they also had well-ordered wastewater drainage and trash collection systems. So here are a few examples of Indus River Valley remains that have been found by archaeologists. So two of the most known and celebrated cities of the Indus River Valley are the Mohenjo-daro and Harappa. Mohenjo-daro became the first UNESCO World Heritage Site in South Asia. Harappa was a city in modern-day Pakistan that is believed to have been its home to as many as 23,500 residents. The city spread over 370 acres, and they're famous for the administrative and religious centers. Mohenjo-daro was the largest city of the Indus Valley civilization, but also one of the world's earliest major urban centers. It's considered to be one of the most sophisticated cities of the time period, with focus on sophisticated engineering and urban planning. So on the left is Harappa, and on the right is Mohenjo-daro. Okay. So one reason the Indus River Valley is so mysterious is because historians have not been able to translate the complicated written language called Indus script. So there is not much that we know about them because we're not able to decipher their artifacts and their writing and their language. So archaeologists are left with a limited amount of information. So you can see, as you saw with Mesopotamia, archaeologists were able to learn a lot more about them because of the fact that they're able to decipher the language. There are thousands of artifacts with 400 to 600 different written symbols. Most of them have been found in Harappa, and that's the reason why the Harappan civilization is synonymous with the Indus Valley civilization because of the drastic effect Harappa had on what we know about them. And interestingly enough, it is thought to have evolved independently of the writings in Mesopotamian and ancient Egypt. Although we did not touch upon this, Mesopotamia and ancient Egypt do have many similarities, and it is thought that they had traded with each other. That's why a lot of their ideals and technology are similar, while the Indus Valley civilization was a little bit independent. As a result of there being limited written information, they have considerable difficulty understanding the people and religious institutions of the Indus Valley civilization. So it is not possible to make conclusive. It's not possible to make conclusions about the people and how they lived because there's nothing to base it on. So what we do know is very limited and could be very far off. So these are some things that they have found. As you can see, they had little seals with shapes and animals. Something that isn't uncommon for the time period. However, still, they don't know what any of this is saying. And on the right is an Indus priest or a statue that was found in Mohenjo-daro. So they did, however, what we do know about them does let us know that they were a very intelligent and advanced civilization with many achievements. The Indus River Valley civilization is considered a Bronze Age society. The ancient Indus River Valley developed new techniques in metallurgy, science of working with copper and bronze. The Harappans also performed intricate handicraft using products made of the semi-precious gemstone carnelian. They had great accuracy in their systems and tools for measuring length and mass. There's much evidence that Harappans were among the first to develop a system of standardized weights and measures. The Harappans also participated in a sea trade network extending from Central Asia to the Middle East. So although they did trade, it is not enough for us to really figure out what their culture was like. So how did they fall? By 1500 BCE, the powerful civilization began to decline at some point. to decline at some point it suddenly ended. Historians are uncertain to this day why this area's power declined. There are some theories that a great earthquake crumbled cities and changed the path of rivers, and that it was all an environmental cause, or that the climate may have changed, which forced them to leave. Soon, however, the Aryans, which are a European group, migrated and brought their language and culture. This created a caste system that was meant to enslave the natives at the bottom and forever change South Asia. It's a completely different topic. This kind of shifts them more into ancient India rather than the Indus Valley civilization. But that is the official end of the Indus Valley civilization. So we can compare the Mesopotamians and the Indus River Valley. Originally, who is older? That is a popular debate, which is the oldest civilization. Originally, Mesopotamia was considered the oldest. However, new evidence suggests that Indus Valley civilization was before Egypt and Mesopotamia. Experts now believe that the Indus Valley civilization is 8,000 years old. The first site in the Indus River Valley can be seen in the Biharana village in Fatabad district, which dates back to around 7,500 BCE, and then Sumer began in 5,000 BC. So there is a big gap. So technically, the Indus River Valley is the oldest based upon the most current information. However, you might see in some sources that Mesopotamia is considered the oldest. One way they are different is that there appears to be very few large structures in ancient India. Unlike Mesopotamia, the inhabitants of the Indus Valley civilization did not build large monumental structures. There is no conclusive evidence of palaces or temples, or even of kings, armies, or priests. So we don't know exactly how they run, what was the social structure like, did they even have social classes? There is no evidence. The difference in military weapons, there is very little evidence of weapons and military culture in the Indus Valley. From what we have seen, it seems that they were focused on arts and survival rather than buildings or religion or weapons. Another difference is that the astronomy seems to be less important in India than in other civilizations, unless, again, the text has been lost. That's just one conclusion that could be made, but again, we could be very off. There was no focus on social classes and religion, which is a very direct contrast to Mesopotamia, and Mesopotamia is being characterized by their focus on ziggurats and temples and religion. So here are a few additional resources and sources. So thank you for listening. If you have any questions, of course, please do contact me and I'll be more than happy to help you with the information or any further questions. Thank you and have a great day.